Welcome back to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast,
Oh.
where we like to take these deep dives
Oh, yeah.
into Islamic teachings. And today we're going to be talking about sacrifice as described in Sahih Muslim,
Okay.
specifically Book 22,
Hmm.
which is aptly titled Sacrifices.
Very nice.
And we know you're interested in understanding the proper way to perform the sacrifice ritual
Yeah.
during Eid al-Adha. And this book is a treasure trove
It is.
of guidance on this very subject.
Absolutely.
We'll be navigating through the numerous hadiths
Yes.
that detail the rulings and guidelines, focusing on the most important ones to equip you
Right.
with a comprehensive understanding of this significant act of worship.
It's fascinating. You know how these hadiths don't just lay down rules?
Yeah.
They really paint a vivid picture,
Mhm.
taking us back in time to the Prophet's era,
Yeah.
allowing us to witness his practices firsthand.
Yeah.
It's like stepping into a living classroom.
Exactly. It makes the learning so much more engaging. So let's start with the timing of this sacrifice.
Okay.
We know Eid al-Adha is a momentous occasion in Islam,
Yes.
commemorating Prophet Ibrahim's willingness to sacrifice his son
Yes.
as an act of obedience to God.
Yes. Very powerful reminder of submission and faith.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of sequence and order in Islamic practices.
Yes.
So you see, while the entire day of Eid is joyous and filled with blessings,
Yes.
the sacrifice is specifically ordained to be performed after the Eid prayer.
That is correct.
Right? There's a specific time frame that elevates this act from a mere custom to an act of worship.
Right.
What happens if someone, perhaps out of eagerness, performs the sacrifice before the Eid prayer?
Well, in those instances, multiple hadiths emphasize that the sacrifice is considered invalid. It's as if a crucial step is missed, altering the very nature of the act.
Okay.
For instance, hadiths 48:18 and 48:19 narrate how the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, instructed those who had sacrificed before the prayer to offer another sacrifice.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like there's no room for leniency here.
It is a clear directive.
Yeah.
And to really drive the point home, there are actually several other hadiths,
Okay.
including 48:20, 48:21, and 48:25, that echo this ruling, emphasizing the importance of adhering to the prescribed order.
Mhm.
It's about aligning ourselves with the Sunnah of the Prophet's practices, which are rooted in divine wisdom.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. It's not just about doing the act, but doing it in the way that's been prescribed.
Yes.
Recognizing the wisdom embedded in those guidelines.
Absolutely. And to illustrate this further, let's take the example of Al-Barabi,
Okay.
Azib's uncle, whose story is recounted in Hadiths 48:23 and 48:26.
Yes, I'm familiar with this narration.
Okay.
He sacrificed early, thinking it was better to share the meat with family and neighbors right away.
He had good intentions, wanting to spread the blessings of Eid.
Right.
But even so, the Prophet, peace be upon him, instructed him to offer another sacrifice to fulfill the ritual properly.
So even with good intentions, we need to follow the guidelines meticulously.
Indeed, it underscores the fact that Islamic rulings are not meant to burden us, but to guide us towards fulfilling our obligations in the best way possible.
But isn't there a hadith where the Prophet allowed some people to sacrifice before the Eid prayer?
Yes, you're right. The Prophet, in his mercy, did allow exceptions in certain cases, as narrated in Hadiths 408:24 and 430.
Okay.
This highlights that Islam is a religion of ease and understanding, acknowledging that unforeseen circumstances might arise.
So could you elaborate on these exceptions? What kind of situations warranted this flexibility?
Certainly imagine someone living far from the Eid prayer grounds in a time when travel wasn't as easy as it is today.
Right.
In such cases, the Prophet allowed them to sacrifice early to avoid hardship or missing the opportunity altogether.
Mhm.
It's about practicality within the framework of the rulings.
That makes sense. It shows that these guidelines are not rigid, but rather accommodate genuine difficulties.
Exactly, and Hadiths 428 and 432 provide similar narrations, further solidifying these points.
So to sum up this crucial point about timing sacrificing before the Eid prayer is generally invalid.
Yes.
It's essential to prioritize the prayer first and adhere to the Prophet's sunnah.
Yes.
While there are exceptions, they are specific to certain situations
Yes.
and underscore the flexibility and mercy embedded in Islamic rulings.
You've captured the essence beautifully. It's about understanding both the rule and its spirit.
Now, moving on to our next discussion point, the age of the sacrificial animal.
Okay.
It seems there are specific guidelines here as well, right?
Absolutely. It's not just any animal that qualifies for sacrifice. It has to be of a certain age to be considered valid.
Okay.
It's like ensuring the fruit is ripe before you pluck it, a matter of maturity and quality.
So what does Sahih Muslim tell us about this age requirement?
Hadith 4836 sheds light on this aspect. The Prophet, peace be upon him, stated that a mature animal is preferred ideally in its prime.
Okay.
This ensures that the animal is healthy, well-developed, and capable of providing substantial wholesome meat.
So there's a focus on both the symbolic and practical aspects of the sacrifice.
Precisely, the animal represents a sacrifice of something valuable and worthy, mirroring Prophet Ibrahim's willingness to sacrifice what was most precious to him.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it ensures that the meat, which is meant to be shared and enjoyed, is of good quality.
But what if someone is unable to procure a mature animal due to limitations in resources or availability?
The Prophet, peace be upon him, recognized that availability could be a factor
Yeah.
and provided guidance for such situations. He said that if obtaining a mature animal is difficult, a ram can be offered, even if it's not yet fully grown.
That's reassuring. It shows that Islam takes into account individual circumstances and aims to make this act of worship accessible to everyone.
Yes, the spirit of the ritual is important, but so is practicality.
Yeah.
And there are examples of this flexibility in practice as well.
Yeah.
In Hadiths 4838 and 4839,
Okay.
we see the Prophet allowing companions to sacrifice lambs that were less than a year old.
So the age requirement isn't an arbitrary rule,
Right.
but is tied to the essence of the sacrifice and the wisdom behind it.
And Hadith 4840 serves as another supporting narration, reinforcing this principle.
It's interesting how each seemingly minor detail is connected to a deeper meaning and purpose.
It's a beautiful reminder that every aspect of this ritual carries significance.
Yeah.
Now that we've covered the timing and the age, let's move on to the method of performing the sacrifice itself.
So this is what I'm most curious about.
Yeah,
I'd love to learn how the Prophet, peace be upon him, carried out this act.
you're in for a treat. The Hadiths provide such vivid descriptions, allowing us to visualize the scene and experience it almost firsthand.
I'm all ears, take us there.
Imagine this. The Prophet, peace be upon him, standing with two magnificent rams, their coats, a striking white with black markings.
Wow.
This scene is described in Hadiths 40841 and 40842.
Oh.
He takes a sharp knife, but before making the incision, he recites the name of Allah, acknowledging his presence and seeking his blessings.
That detail about reciting Allah's name really highlights the importance of maintaining a spiritual connection even during a physical act.
Exactly. It reminds us that this isn't just about slaughtering an animal, but about performing an act of worship with complete awareness and submission to God.
And what happens after reciting Allah's name?
The Prophet, peace be upon him, then utters the takbir, Allahu Akbar, glorifying God and declaring his greatness. It's a declaration of faith and a recognition of God's absolute power.
It's incredible how these details enrich our understanding of the Prophet's way and guide us in our own practice.
And to emphasize the importance of this method, we have Hadiths 40843 and 40844,
Okay.
which provide similar narrations highlighting the consistency and significance of the Prophet's actions.
It's as if we're right there with him, observing each gesture and word.
Now, remember how Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, was known for her sharp memory and attention to detail?
Yeah.
Well, Hadith 4845 provides a beautiful account narrated by her that adds another layer to this picture.
Oh, I'd love to hear this. Aisha's narrations are always so insightful.
She described preparing the knife for the Prophet, sharpening it meticulously on a stone. As he takes the knife and the ram gently placing it on the ground, he recites a specific prayer.
That's fascinating. What was the prayer?
The prayer was, Bismillah Allah taqabbal min Muhammadin wa ali Muhammadin wa min ummati Muhammadin.
Wow.
He was not just sacrificing for himself, but for his entire family lineage and the whole Muslim community.
SubhanAllah. It's a beautiful reminder of the Prophet's boundless compassion and his concern for the well-being of his followers.
It speaks volumes about his character and highlights the interconnectedness and unity within the Ummah, the global Muslim community.
It's incredible how a single act can encompass so much meaning and depth.
Indeed. So to summarize, the Prophet's method of sacrifice involved reciting Allah's name, uttering the takbir, placing his foot on the animal side for control and swiftness, and reciting a heartfelt prayer encompassing the entire Ummah.
Yeah.
It was a complete picture guiding us in our own practice and highlighting the profound meaning embedded in every step.
It's more than just a physical act. It's an act of devotion, remembrance, and unity.
Beautifully said. Now, moving on from the method, I know you're also curious about the tools used for sacrifice.
Yes, absolutely.
Especially considering the differences between the Prophet's time and our modern contexts.
Makes me wonder, are there specific guidelines about using modern tools?
That's where Hadith 48846 sheds some light.
Okay.
It recounts the story of the companions asking the prophet about using reeds to slaughter animals because they lacked knives.
That's an interesting scenario. It seems even back then there were questions about adapting to different circumstances.
Exactly. And the prophet's response provides valuable insight into how we can apply these principles today.
Okay.
He emphasized that the tool should effectively enable blood flow, ensuring a swift and humane sacrifice.
So the focus is on minimizing the animal's suffering and ensuring a quick and clean process.
Precisely. But he specifically prohibited using teeth, nails, and bones.
Why those specific prohibitions?
It boils down to maintaining a certain level of dignity and respect for the animal. Using those methods would be crude and could inflict unnecessary suffering.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about honoring the animal and acknowledging its sacrifice in a respectful manner.
Yes, and within this same hadith, there's an intriguing anecdote that further illustrates this point.
Okay.
Picture this. A camel, panicked and wild, is running amok among the companions. It's a dangerous situation, and they don't have the means to subdue it conventionally.
Oh my gosh, I can imagine the chaos. So what do?
They resorted to using arrows to bring the camel down, a quick-thinking solution in a challenging situation.
But was using arrows permissible?
The prophet, upon witnessing this, approved their actions.
Okay.
He recognized the necessity of the situation and compared the wild camel to a wild animal that required a different approach.
So in exceptional circumstances, unconventional tools are permitted as long as they fulfill the purpose of swiftness and minimizing suffering.
Exactly. And Hadith 4847, 4848, and 400 and 849 offer further narrations that support this understanding. They provide additional context and detail, reinforcing the principle of adapting to situations while upholding the core values of the ritual.
This has been incredibly enlightening. It shows how Islamic teachings balance principles with practicality, providing a framework that is both adaptable and grounded in wisdom and compassion.
Indeed. Now, before we move on to our next segment, do you have any reflections or questions about what we've covered so far?
I think this discussion about the tools has been particularly fascinating.
Okay.
I'm realizing that it's not just about following a set of rules, but about understanding the underlying principles and applying them thoughtfully to different situations.
That's a profound observation. It speaks to the essence of Islamic jurisprudence, which encourages critical thinking and contextual understanding.
It's making me think about how we can apply this approach to other aspects of our lives, not just rituals.
That's a wonderful takeaway. It shows how these teachings can have a ripple effect influencing our mindset and approach to various challenges.
Yeah.
Now, are you ready to dive into the next layer of this intricate tapestry of sacrifice?
Absolutely. I'm eager to learn more. What's next on our agenda?
Let's delve into what happens after the sacrifice, specifically the consumption and preservation of the meat.
This is a topic that often comes up,
Yes.
especially regarding the 3-day rule.
Ah, yes, the 3-day rule. It's a point of curiosity for many, and rightfully so. But to understand it,
Yeah.
we need to take a journey back to the early days of Islam, a time of hardship and scarcity.
All right, let's time travel. Set the scene for us.
Imagine the early Muslims, many of them newly reverted to Islam.
Okay.
Facing various challenges, resources are limited, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, guides them with wisdom and compassion.
So the 3-day rule wasn't just an arbitrary decree, it was implemented within a specific context.
Exactly. And we see this reflected in Hadiths 4850, 4850, 4852, 4853, 4854, and 4855.
Okay.
These hadiths initially prohibited consuming the sacrificial meat beyond 3 days.
Mm.
It might seem strict at first glance, but understanding the reasoning behind it sheds light on its wisdom.
I'm ready to uncover that wisdom.
Yeah.
What was the Prophet's intention behind this rule?
Imagine poor people from the desert flocking to Medina during Eid al-Adha, seeking sustenance and support.
Okay.
The Prophet, peace be upon him, recognizing their need, instructed people to keep the meat for 3 days, prioritizing those who had traveled far and were most vulnerable.
That's such a compassionate approach, ensuring that the most vulnerable are taken care of first. It highlights the social dimension of this ritual, going beyond individual piety to encompass communal responsibility.
You've hit the nail on the head. And it wasn't just about preventing hoarding, it was also about encouraging the prompt distribution of the meat to those in need, a tangible expression of Islamic principles of social welfare and support.
But what happened later when conditions improved and the Muslim community wasn't facing the same level of hardship?
That's where the story takes an interesting turn.
Okay.
In Hadith 4886, Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, provides us with a valuable insight into this transition.
I always enjoy Aisha's narrations. She had such a keen understanding of the Prophet's teachings.
She recalled how, as the situation improved, the Muslims raised a valid concern. They pointed out that they used the animal hides for various purposes, like making tents or containers,
Hmm.
and rendered the fat for preservation and cooking.
It seems these were practical concerns showcasing how the community was evolving and finding new ways to utilize the resources.
Yes, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, acknowledged their points.
Mm-hmm.
In his wisdom, he lifted the 3-day restriction, recognizing that the initial reasons for its implementation were no longer as pressing.
So the rule was abrogated? It was no longer binding?
Precisely, once the conditions of hardship had passed, the need for this specific restriction lessened.
Okay.
And this shift is highlighted in several hadiths, including 4,857, 458, 459, 4860, 4861, 4863, 4864, and 465.
Yeah.
They all emphasize the permissibility of consuming, preserving, and giving the meat in charity after the initial 3 days.
It's amazing. It shows how Islamic rulings are contextual, responding to the needs of the community and adapting to changing circumstances.
Exactly. And Hadith 48-22 explicitly states that the change in ruling was due to the improved conditions of the people.
This is such a powerful example of how Islamic teachings are not static, but dynamic, evolving to accommodate new realities while upholding the core principles of justice, compassion, and ease.
You've articulated it beautifully.
Right.
And Hadiths 48866 and 48867 further reiterate the abrogation of the 3-day limit, solidifying our understanding of this evolution.
So the 3-day rule, initially implemented for a specific purpose,
Yes.
was eventually lifted, showcasing the flexibility and wisdom inherent in Islamic rulings.
Yes.
It's about understanding the spirit behind the rulings
Yes.
and recognizing that they are meant to benefit us, not burden us.
Precisely. Now, having explored the permissible aspects, it's equally important to be aware of the prohibited practices
Okay.
associated with the sacrifice. This is where we delve into the historical context and the purification of practices that Islam brought about.
Prohibited practices. That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
One such practice mentioned in Hadith 4868 is the prohibition of sacrificing fara and atira.
Okay.
These were remnants of pre-Islamic practices that didn't align with the pure monotheism of Islam.
Ah, so these were customs that carried baggage from the period of ignorance, a time before the light of Islam illuminated Arabia.
Exactly. Farah referred to the firstborn young one of a camel often sacrificed to idols or deities in pre-Islamic Arabia.
Okay.
It was an act associated with polytheism and superstition beliefs that Islam vehemently rejected.
And what about Atira? What was the significance of that practice?
Atira involved sacrificing a portion of the animal to idols or spirits seeking their favor or protection. It stemmed from a belief in multiple deities and powers that could influence people's lives, a concept that contradicted the Islamic belief in the oneness of God.
So Islam came to purify these practices, to sever the ties with any form of idolatry or superstition,
Yes.
and to redirect all acts of worship, including sacrifice, solely to Allah.
Precisely, it was about establishing pure monotheism, a foundation upon which all other Islamic principles are built.
This prohibition is really insightful. It highlights the importance of sincere intention, ensuring that our actions are motivated by a genuine desire to please Allah and not influenced by cultural baggage or misguided beliefs.
Absolutely. It's a reminder to constantly evaluate our practices and ensure they are aligned with the core principles of Islam.
It's about purifying our hearts and actions, ensuring that our worship is free from any taint of idolatry or superstition.
Beautifully put. Now let's move on to another prohibited practice that won't surprise you. It involves a seemingly mundane act, cutting hair and nails.
Wait, cutting hair and nails, how is that connected to sacrifice? It seems unconnected at first glance.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Hadiths 4869, 4870, 4871, 4872, and 4873 all prohibit those intending to sacrifice from cutting their hair or trimming their nails, starting from the beginning of Dhul Hijjah, the month of Hajj and Eid al-Adha.
That's a very specific time frame.
Yeah.
And it's intriguing how it ties into these significant events. What's the wisdom behind this prohibition?
It's a symbolic act of dedication and submission. By refraining from these actions, the person performing the sacrifice is outwardly expressing their commitment to Allah during this sacred time. It's like entering a state of ihram, the state of ritual purity and devotion during Hajj, where pilgrims also abstain from cutting hair and nails.
Ah, that makes sense. It creates a sense of unity and focus, aligning the outward appearance with the inner intention.
Exactly. It's about preparing oneself holistically for this act of worship, both internally and externally.
And did this practice continue throughout Islamic history?
Well, like many practices, it did face a period of neglect.
Yeah.
Hadiths 48874 and 4875 narrate a story that sheds light on this Sayyid B.
Okay.
Musayyib, a renowned scholar, witnessed people in a bathhouse trying to remove hair using chemicals right before Eid al-Adha.
Oh, I can imagine his reaction. It must have been concerning to see people neglecting this practice.
He was indeed concerned. He reminded them of this forgotten practice, citing Salama's narration of the Prophet's instructions.
It's a reminder that even seemingly small practices carry weight and should be revived and preserved. It's about recognizing the wisdom in the Prophet's teachings and striving to follow them diligently.
Absolutely. It's about honoring the Sunnah and understanding that these teachings are not mere rituals. They carry deep meaning and purpose, even if they seem unconventional to us today.
It's like uncovering hidden gems within our tradition, appreciating the richness and depth of Islamic teachings.
Beautifully said. It's an ongoing journey of discovery and revival. Now, before we conclude this part of our deep dive, let's touch upon another crucial concept.
Yeah.
Dedicating the sacrifice solely to Allah.
This sounds like a fundamental principle. I'm ready to explore it further.
It is indeed fundamental. This is where we circle back to the very essence of sacrifice, pure monotheism, and sincere intention. The hadiths on this matter are powerful and leave no room for ambiguity.
Okay.
They highlight the severity of associating partners with Allah, emphasizing that the sacrifice is an act of worship meant solely for Him.
So any deviation from this pure intention is considered a great transgression.
Absolutely. In Hadiths 4876, 477, and 4878, the Prophet, peace be upon him, explicitly cursed those who sacrifice on anyone besides Allah, placing this act alongside other major sins.
SubhanAllah, that's a serious condemnation. It highlights the gravity of shirk, the association of partners with Allah, which is considered the greatest sin in Islam.
Exactly. It's not just about the outward actions, but also about the inner state of the heart, the purity of intention. The sacrifice is a manifestation of our submission to Allah, a recognition of His lordship, and our complete dependence upon Him.
It's like a spiritual barometer measuring the sincerity of our faith.
Precisely. And these hadiths serve as a powerful reminder to constantly check our intentions, ensuring that our actions are motivated by sincere devotion to Allah alone, not driven by cultural pressures, societal expectations, or a desire for worldly recognition.
It's about purifying our hearts and aligning our actions with the essence of our faith, pure monotheism.
Beautifully put. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our exploration, from the precise timings and age requirements to the profound symbolism and ethical considerations.
It's been an incredible journey so far. Each detail has painted a richer picture, revealing the depth and wisdom of Islamic teachings.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll continue our deep dive into the fascinating world of sacrifice as described in Sahih Muslim. We'll uncover even more gems of wisdom and practical guidance.
I can't wait. This is truly enriching. Until next time, dear listeners, may you reflect on what we've discussed today and find inspiration in the profound teachings of our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him.
Inshallah. Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan. It's great to continue our exploration of sacrifice as detailed in Sahih Muslim.
I'm so ready for part 2. We've already uncovered so much, from the timing and age requirements to the method and even the tools used for sacrifice. It's fascinating how each detail connects to deeper principles.
You're right. It's a testament to the holistic nature of Islamic teachings, where even seemingly mundane aspects carry profound meaning.
And speaking of deeper principles, I'd love to revisit the topic of prohibited practices. We touched upon sacrificing for anyone other than Allah and the prohibition against cutting hair and nails during Dhul Hijjah.
Those are key prohibitions that highlight the purification of practices brought about by Islam. It's a continuous reminder to evaluate our intentions and ensure our actions align with pure monotheism.
Okay, so let's pick up where we left off. The prohibition against sacrificing for anyone besides Allah.
Right.
That's a powerful reminder that the sacrifice is an act of worship directed solely towards Him.
Precisely the hadiths we explored, like 400, 876, 477, and 478, leave no room for ambiguity on this matter. The Prophet, peace be upon him, explicitly cursed those who committed this act, placing it alongside other major sins.
It emphasizes the gravity of shirk, the association of partners with Allah, which is considered the greatest sin in Islam.
Yes.
It makes me wonder, even if someone performs the outward actions of sacrifice correctly, but their intention is misaligned, is it still considered valid?
That's a thoughtful question, and it highlights the importance of intention in Islam. If someone were to sacrifice for any other reason, be it seeking worldly gain, appeasing spirits, or fulfilling cultural customs that contradict Islamic teachings, it would be a grave error.
Mm.
The purity of intention is paramount. It's the heart of the matter.
So it's not just about going through the motions, but about having a heart filled with sincerity and devotion to Allah alone.
Exactly. The sacrifice is a means of drawing closer to Allah, not a means to an end in this world. Now let's move on to the other prohibited practice we were discussing, the one about cutting hair and nails. I can imagine it seems a bit puzzling at first glance.
It does. I can understand how the timing of the sacrifice or the age of the animal are crucial, but the connection between cutting hair and nails
Right.
and the act of sacrifice seems a bit unclear.
It's a fascinating example of how even seemingly minor actions can carry symbolic weight in Islam.
Hmm.
This prohibition, as we touched upon earlier, is about outwardly expressing our commitment to Allah during this sacred time. By refraining from cutting hair and trimming nails, we're aligning our physical appearance with our inner state of devotion.
It reminds me of Ihram, the state of ritual purity during Hajj,
Yes,
where pilgrims also abstain from these actions.
that's an excellent connection. It's about cultivating that same sense of unity, focus, and separation from worldly concerns as we prepare for the act of sacrifice.
Right.
And just like with the Ihram, it's a practice that was initially forgotten by some.
You mentioned that earlier. Tell me more about this forgetting and rediscovering of the practice.
Well, the story goes that Said B. Musaib, a prominent scholar, witnessed people in a bathhouse trying to remove hair using chemicals right before Eid al-Adha.
Oh my gosh.
He immediately reminded them of this forgotten practice, referencing the narration of the Prophet's instructions by Salama, may Allah be pleased with her.
It highlights the importance of continually seeking knowledge and reviving practices that might have been neglected over time.
Precisely, it's about honoring the Sunnah and recognizing that there's wisdom embedded in these teachings, even if they seem unconventional to us today. It's all connected. The timing, the age of the animal, the method, the prohibited acts. They all work together to create a holistic picture of sacrifice.
You've grasped the essence beautifully. It's about understanding that each detail contributes to the bigger picture, enriching the meaning and impact of this significant act of worship. Now let's switch gears and discuss a topic that often sparks questions and discussion.
Okay.
The tools used for sacrifice. I know you're curious about how the guidelines we discussed earlier apply in our modern context.
You read my mind. The Prophet, peace be upon him, lived in a different time.
Yeah.
So are there specific rulings about using modern tools like sharp knives or even electric stunners?
That's an excellent question, and it showcases how Islamic jurisprudence addresses contemporary issues within the framework of established principles, while the Hadiths don't explicitly mention modern tools. They provide us with guiding principles that we can apply.
So it's about understanding the wisdom behind the rulings and extrapolating them to new situations. Exactly. If you recall when the companions inquired about using reeds for slaughter, the Prophet, peace be upon him, emphasized that the tool should effectively enable blood flow.
Right. Ensuring a swift and humane sacrifice while minimizing the animal suffering.
Precisely, and the prohibition against using teeth, nails, and bones stemmed from maintaining a certain level of dignity and respect for the animal.
So if we apply these principles to modern tools, what can we conclude?
Well, if a sharp knife properly maintained and utilized can swiftly and effectively sever the necessary arteries, ensuring minimal pain and suffering, it would be permissible. However, it's crucial to approach this with careful consideration and consultation with knowledgeable scholars who can assess specific tools and methods.
So it's not a blanket approval for any modern tool, but rather a case-by-case assessment based on established principles.
Exactly. That's where scholarly expertise and an understanding of the context of rulings come into play. It's about striking a balance between tradition and modernity while upholding the core values of the ritual.
Now, what about electric stunners? I know they're becoming increasingly common in modern slaughterhouses,
Yes.
but there seems to be some debate about their permissibility.
That's a complex issue, and there are differing opinions among contemporary scholars. It's important to understand the nuances of these perspectives.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are the main arguments on both sides?
Some scholars argue that stunning, if done correctly and with the sole intention of minimizing suffering, can be permissible.
Okay.
They base their argument on the principle of compassion and the Prophet's emphasis on minimizing harm to animals.
So they view stunning as a way to further enhance the humane aspect of the sacrifice?
Yes. They argue that if stunning can render the animal unconscious, quickly and effectively reducing its pain and distress, It aligns with the spirit of Islamic
That's
teachings.
a valid perspective. What about the scholars who hold a different view? What are their concerns?
Those who express reservations about stunning primarily worry about the potential for the animal to die before the actual slaughter. If the stunning causes death before the blood is drained, it might compromise the validity of the sacrifice.
So they prioritize adherence to the traditional method as the most reliable way to ensure the animal is alive at the time of the incision.
Precisely. They also emphasize the need for further research and a deeper understanding of the physiological effects of stunning before it can be definitively deemed permissible.
It's a reminder that Islamic jurisprudence is a living tradition constantly evolving to address new challenges and realities.
Exactly. And this ongoing discussion and debate are signs of a healthy intellectual tradition that seeks to find the best solutions while staying true to the foundational principles.
This discussion has been incredibly insightful. It's clear there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer, but the key takeaway for me is to prioritize minimizing suffering while upholding the core principles of the sacrifice.
You've summarized it perfectly. It's about seeking guidance from knowledgeable scholars, understanding the different perspectives, and making an informed decision based on the best available knowledge.
It's reassuring to know that Islamic teachings provide a framework that's adaptable and grounded in wisdom and compassion. Now, I'm excited to continue our exploration of the deeper aspects of sacrifice.
Yes.
Where do we go from here?
Let's shift our focus to what happens after the sacrifice, the consumption and preservation of the meat.
I'm eager to delve into that. We already explored the three-day rule and its historical context, but I'm sure there's much more to unpack.
You're right. It's not just about the act of sacrifice itself, but also about what comes after and how the blessings are distributed.
That's an excellent point. It's not just about the individual,
Oh, right.
but about the community as well.
Precisely. The Hadiths provide guidelines that emphasize balance and fairness when it comes to the distribution of the meat. Traditionally, it is divided into three portions.
3 portions. Tell me more about how this division works.
The first portion is kept for the family who perform the sacrifice, allowing them to partake in the blessings of the day and enjoy the fruits of their act of worship. It's a time for them to come together, share a meal, and reflect on the significance of the occasion.
That makes sense. It honors the family's effort and reinforces the bonds within the household.
Yeah.
What about the other 2 portions?
The second portion is given to relatives and friends, strengthening ties of kinship and spreading the blessings with loved ones. It's a way to express care and generosity, and it fosters a sense of community and shared joy during Eid al-Adha.
It's beautiful how this act extends beyond the immediate family, fostering a spirit of interconnectedness.
Exactly. And finally, the third portion, a significant one, is dedicated to charity. It's given to those in need, the poor and the less fortunate, embodying the spirit of compassion and social responsibility that Eid al-Adha represents.
This is where the social dimension of sacrifice truly shines. It's a reminder that our acts of worship have implications beyond our individual selves, rippling outward to benefit the wider community.
Beautifully put, it's about recognizing our responsibility to care for the vulnerable and to utilize the blessings we receive to alleviate the suffering of others.
It's a reminder that Islam is not just about personal piety, but also about social justice, solidarity, and compassion.
Yeah.
It's about building a just and equitable society where everyone's needs are considered.
You've captured the essence of this practice. The distribution of the meat is a tangible manifestation of these Islamic principles. It's not just about fulfilling a ritual or enjoying a feast, but also about sharing the blessings with others and extending a helping hand to bridge the gap between those who have and those who have not.
This exploration of the meat distribution has added another layer of meaning to our understanding of sacrifice.
It's a beautiful reminder that this act of worship encompasses both individual piety and social responsibility. It's about aligning our actions with the values of Islam and striving to make a positive impact on the world around us now. Before we conclude part 2 of our deep dive, are there any thoughts or questions that have come to mind for you?
This whole discussion about the distribution of the meat has been eye-opening. I'm realizing that sacrifice is not just a ritual, it's a way of life. It's about constantly striving to embody those values of generosity, compassion, and selflessness in everything we do.
That's a profound reflection, and it speaks to the transformative power of this ritual. It's about taking the lessons learned from the act of sacrifice and applying them to all aspects of our lives.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of our lives and understanding that our actions impact those around us.
Exactly. Now, are you ready to continue our journey in the final part of our deep dive?
Absolutely. I'm eager to see what other gems of wisdom Sahih Muslim has in store for us.
Stay tuned, dear listeners, for part 3, where we'll explore further insights and practical guidance on this profound act of worship.
Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan. It's hard to believe we've reached the final part of our deep dive into the concept of sacrifice, as described in Sahih Muslim.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? We've explored the nuances of timing, the significance of the animal's age, the precise method of sacrifice, and even delved into the fascinating world of adapting these guidelines to modern tools.
We've also uncovered the wisdom behind the three-day rule, its historical context, and its eventual abrogation. And who could forget the intriguing discussion about those prohibited practices that shed light on the purification Islam brought to pre-existing customs?
And just when we thought we'd covered it all, we discovered the profound social dimension of sacrifice, learning about the equitable distribution of the meat and how it embodies Islamic principles of compassion and social responsibility.
This exploration has been truly eye-opening, adding layer upon layer of meaning to what I initially thought was a straightforward ritual.
It's amazing how these hadiths, like pieces of a puzzle, come together to create a complete picture of sacrifice, revealing its depth, wisdom, and relevance even in our modern times.
Speaking of relevance, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious about what practical steps we can take to ensure that we're not just absorbing this knowledge, but also translating it into action.
That's a crucial question, and it speaks to the heart of why we embark on these deep dives in the first place. Knowledge without action is like a seed that remains dormant, unable to sprout and bear fruit.
So beyond understanding the technicalities of the sacrifice, what are some takeaways that we can implement in our lives?
Well, one key takeaway that resonates throughout these hadiths is the importance of sincerity of intention. It's a recurring theme that underscores the essence of sacrifice. The act itself is meaningless without a pure heart that seeks only the pleasure of Allah.
It's a powerful reminder to constantly check our motives to ensure that our actions, whether related to sacrifice or any other aspect of life, are driven by a genuine desire to please Allah.
Exactly. It's about purifying our intentions, shedding any traces of showing off, seeking praise, or fulfilling cultural obligations that might contradict Islamic teachings.
So before even thinking about the logistics of the sacrifice, we need to examine our hearts and ensure that our intentions are aligned with the spirit of the ritual.
Precisely, it's about recognizing that sacrifice is an act of worship, and true worship stems from a heart that is sincere and submitted to Allah.
It's a humbling thought, realizing that the outward actions are secondary to the inner state of our hearts.
And this principle of sincerity extends beyond the act of sacrifice itself. It's a guiding principle for all aspects of our lives, from our interactions with others to the decisions we make on a daily basis.
It makes me think about how we can incorporate this awareness into our everyday routines, constantly checking our intentions and striving to purify our actions.
That's a wonderful reflection, and it highlights how these teachings, while rooted in specific rituals, have universal applications that can transform our lives.
Another profound takeaway from this deep dive has been the emphasis on compassion, both towards the animal being sacrificed and towards the community as a whole.
You're absolutely right, from the guidelines about minimizing the animal's suffering to the meticulous instructions about distributing the meat. Compassion shines through as a central theme.
It's a reminder that Islam is not just about rituals and rules, but about embodying values of mercy, kindness, and empathy in all our dealings.
And this compassion extends beyond our immediate circle to encompass the wider community, especially those who are less fortunate.
The distribution of the meat is a beautiful example of this, highlighting the Islamic principles of social justice, solidarity, and caring for the vulnerable.
It's a tangible expression of our responsibility towards others, a way to share the blessings we receive and to alleviate the suffering of those in need.
It's making me reflect on how we can cultivate this spirit of compassion in our own lives, going beyond the act of sacrifice to actively seek out opportunities to help those around us.
That's a beautiful aspiration, and it speaks to the transformative potential of these teachings. When we internalize these values, they become woven into the fabric of our being, influencing our thoughts, words, and actions.
And this journey of internalization and embodiment is a continuous one, requiring constant effort and self-reflection.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's not about reaching a destination, but about embracing the journey, continuously striving to refine our character and align ourselves with the teachings of Islam.
It's a reminder that learning is an ongoing process, and these deep dives are not just one-time events, but catalysts for lifelong growth and transformation.
I couldn't have said it better myself now as we conclude this deep dive. I want to emphasize one final point that might seem obvious, but is often overlooked.
I'm all ears. What is it?
It's the importance of seeking knowledge from qualified scholars, especially when it comes to implementing these teachings in our lives.
That's an excellent point. While these hadiths provide a solid foundation, Islamic jurisprudence can be complex, and there are nuances that require expert understanding.
Exactly. There might be specific situations that require clarification, contemporary issues that need to be addressed within the framework of Islamic principles, or individual circumstances that necessitate tailored guidance.
So while these deep dives provide valuable insights, they are not meant to replace the guidance of qualified scholars.
Precisely, it's about combining knowledge with action-seeking clarification when needed, and approaching these teachings with humility and a willingness to learn.
This has been an incredible journey uncovering the layers of wisdom and meaning embedded in the act of sacrifice. But as we conclude this deep dive, I can't help but feel a sense of responsibility, a yearning to translate this knowledge into action.
And that, my friend, is the ultimate goal. These teachings are not meant to remain confined to books and podcasts, but to be lived, breathed, and embodied in our daily lives.
It's a challenge, but also an incredible opportunity to connect with the essence of our faith and to strive for a life of meaning and purpose.
May this deep dive into Sahih Muslim serve as a catalyst for personal growth, spiritual enlightenment, and a renewed commitment to living a life that reflects the beauty and wisdom of Islam.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Echoes of Ihsan. May Allah grant us the ability to implement these teachings and to experience the true essence of sacrifice, both in this life and the next.
Until next time, may peace and blessings be upon you all.